When the house becomes quiet, and the only sound you hear is the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock, that's when it truly hits you. Life has slowed down. For years, you were surrounded by voices, routines, and purpose. But now, the silence feels louder than ever. Yet somewhere inside that silence lies something waiting to be found again. Peace, meaning, and a new kind of happiness. Meet Harold Bennett, a 68-year-old retired postmaster from Cedar Falls, Iowa. For most of his life, Harold woke up before sunrise, made coffee in his stainless steel mug, and drove down the same street to the small-town post office he ran for 35 years. He knew every face, every story, and even the handwriting of half the town. But now, his alarm clock no longer buzzes at 5:30 a.m. The mail routes belong to someone else. His house feels bigger, emptier, and somehow quieter than he remembers. Each morning, Harold sits by the window, coffee in hand, watching the mail truck pass his house without stopping. There's a strange ache in that moment, but also a quiet curiosity. What am I supposed to do now? He often whispers to himself. The first few weeks after retirement, Harold tried to fill the hours with small tasks, mowing the lawn, repainting the mailbox, organizing old photo albums. But the truth was, these chores didn't quiet the restlessness inside him. Every evening, he found himself turning on the TV just for background noise, not really watching anything. He missed the rhythm of his old life, the greetings, the laughter, even the small frustrations of a busy morning at the post office. But deep down, he knew that chapter was closed. What he didn't know was that a new one was about to begin, in the most unexpected way. One crisp October morning, Harold decided to walk into town. The leaves had turned a golden red, and the sidewalks were littered with soft piles of them. As he passed the cafe he once visited only on Saturdays, he noticed a small "Help Wanted, Part-Time" sign taped to the window. He smiled at it for a moment, not because he needed the job, but because it reminded him that life was still happening all around him. He stepped inside for coffee and was greeted by a young woman named Grace, who ran the place with her husband. She recognized Harold instantly. She'd seen him for years delivering mail to her parents' house. That simple recognition, that small spark of connection, warmed him more than the cup of coffee in his hands. Over the next few days, Harold began stopping by the cafe more often. Grace always had time to talk, and her easy laughter slowly chipped away at the loneliness that had settled around him. One afternoon, she asked him to look at the cafe's old notice board, the one people used to post community news on. "It's all outdated," she sighed. "I wish someone could organize it again." Harold grinned at her. "That I can do." And just like that, he found his first small purpose in retirement, keeping the town connected, one bulletin at a time. Every Thursday, Harold began collecting announcements, church events, yard sales, local birthdays, and pinning them up neatly. It was a small act, but people noticed. The cafe's regulars started chatting with him, asking about upcoming events or simply sharing stories from their lives. One woman even said, "You were the reason I still know what's going on around here." Harold laughed, but inside, he felt something light up. The same feeling he used to get when he handed someone their long-awaited letter. Connection, purpose, community. Winter came early that year. Snow blanketed Cedar Falls, and most folks stayed indoors, but Harold kept walking to the cafe, bundled in his old wool coat. One quiet morning, he found a small envelope pinned on the notice board. It read, "For the man who keeps us connected." Inside was a simple thank you note, signed by nearly 20 townspeople. Harold stared at the signatures, people he hadn't realized he'd touched in such a quiet, meaningful way. That morning, his coffee tasted sweeter, and for the first time in months, his heart felt full. With each passing season, Harold began noticing how peaceful the slow pace of his new life had become. He started taking long evening walks by the river, sometimes stopping to watch the ducks glide across the water. He'd never had time for that before. The sky would turn golden, then violet, and he'd think to himself, maybe slowing down isn't so bad after all. It was in these quiet moments that Harold began to rediscover something he'd lost long ago: gratitude for the simple things. One afternoon, Harold met an elderly woman named Martha sitting on a park bench feeding the birds. They struck up a conversation, and he learned she had moved to Cedar Falls to be closer to her daughter. Like Harold, she lived alone and sometimes felt invisible in a world that seemed to rush past her. They began meeting at the park every few days, sharing stories from their younger years. For the first time in a long while, Harold found himself laughing again. Not that polite kind, but the deep belly laugh that comes from being understood. As spring returned, Harold and Martha's friendship grew. They'd sit on the porch of her little house, sipping iced tea and watching the world drift by. Sometimes they'd talk about their late spouses, the memories that hurt and healed at the same time. Martha once said, "Grief doesn't go away, Harold. It just changes its shape." Those words stayed with him. He began to realize that loneliness wasn't something to run from. It was something to listen to. In its quiet whisper, he could finally hear his own heart again. One morning, Martha invited Harold to join her at the local community center. She said, "They're looking for volunteers, and you'd be perfect." Reluctantly, Harold agreed. Soon, he was helping organize a senior letters program, a simple initiative where retirees wrote letters to children in local schools, sharing life advice and stories. When Harold read his first reply from a curious 10-year-old named Ethan, he felt tears sting his eyes. "Mr. Harold," he wrote, "your letter made me think about my grandpa. I think I'll visit him more often now." It was then Harold realized he wasn't just filling time anymore. He was shaping it into something meaningful. The Senior Letters program became the heart of Harold's week. Every Thursday afternoon, he'd sit at a long wooden table at the community center, pen in hand, surrounded by a dozen other retirees. Each of them had a different story, a different wisdom to share. Some wrote about their childhoods, others about lost loves or lessons learned the hard way. For Harold, it became a form of healing, a way to pass on everything he'd carried inside for years. He realized that even in his quiet, retired life, he was still delivering something meaningful, words that could make a difference. One day, Grace from the cafe dropped by the community center with a tray of cookies. She said, "I just wanted to say thank you to Harold. My son's class got your letters and he couldn't stop talking about them." Her words filled the room with smiles. It was a small reminder that kindness always finds its way back. As Harold looked around at his fellow seniors, each with a letter in hand and hope in their eyes, he realized something important. Aging wasn't about losing your purpose. It was about discovering new ways to express it. Summer arrived with long, gentle evenings. Harold started hosting small gatherings at his porch. Just a few neighbors, some iced lemonade, and stories that seemed to float into the night air. The laughter, the shared memories, even the comfortable silences made his house feel alive again. One evening, Martha looked around and said softly, "You see, Harold, you were never meant to live alone. You just needed to open the door." He smiled and nodded, realizing how true those words were. Loneliness, he thought, had slowly transformed into companionship. One morning, Harold received a letter from Ethan, the boy he'd once written to. Inside was a photo of Ethan and his grandpa fishing together. The note read, "Thank you, Mr. Harold. You helped me understand him better." Harold sat quietly, holding the letter against his chest. For years, he had delivered thousands of letters, without ever knowing what they truly meant to people. But now, as a retired man, he finally felt what a single letter could do. It could bridge generations, soften hearts, and keep memories alive. A few months later, Martha's health began to decline. She grew weaker and couldn't visit the park as often. Harold would bring her fresh flowers and read aloud the letters the children wrote. One evening, she whispered, "Promise me something, Harold. Keep writing, even after I'm gone." He squeezed her hand gently and promised. That night, he sat on his porch long after the sun had set, the air cool and quiet. Grief visited him once again, but this time it came wrapped in gratitude. He was thankful for friendship, for time, and for the chance to love again in unexpected ways. When Martha passed away a few weeks later, the whole community felt the loss. At her memorial, Harold spoke a few words, simple but sincere. "She taught me that even in our final chapters, there's beauty in sharing the story." People hugged him afterwards, some with tears, some with knowing smiles. That night back home, he placed her favorite flower, a white daisy, on the windowsill. For the first time, he didn't fear being alone. He understood that solitude didn't mean emptiness. It meant space to cherish what once was. The following autumn, Harold decided to turn his small porch gatherings into a regular event called Story Evenings. Every Sunday, neighbors and friends gathered under soft lights, sharing tales from their lives. It became a local tradition. Some stories made them laugh until their sides hurt. Others brought quiet tears. Harold often ended each evening by saying, "We all have chapters worth sharing. Don't let them stay unread." Slowly, his once quiet home became a lighthouse for others seeking warmth, connection, and peace. One chilly December night, the mayor of Cedar Falls visited Harold. "You've done something special here," he said, handing Harold a framed certificate of appreciation. "You reminded us what community really means." Harold chuckled softly. "All I did was put up a few letters and brew some coffee." But deep inside, he knew the truth. He had helped people rediscover the simple beauty of being there for one another. That night, as snow fell gently outside, Harold sat by the fire, feeling an immense sense of contentment he hadn't known in years. Years passed, and Harold grew older, but not smaller in spirit. His hair turned silver, his steps slower, yet his days were filled with meaning. Sometimes he'd sit at the cafe window, the same place where everything began, watching young people rush by with phones in hand, barely noticing the world around them. He'd smile quietly and think, "One day they'll slow down too, and when they do, they'll see what I see now." Life, he realized, was never about how fast you go. It was about how deeply you live. On his 75th birthday, Harold received a large envelope in the mail. Inside were dozens of handwritten letters from townspeople, children, and old friends. Some thanked him for his wisdom. Others simply wrote about how he'd inspired them. As he read through each one, tears rolled down his cheeks, not from sadness, but from fulfillment. He leaned back in his chair, looked out the window, and whispered, "I guess I was never really alone." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in gold and pink, and Harold smiled, knowing that his story had found its peace. And so, dear listener, remember this: living alone doesn't mean living without meaning. Sometimes solitude is the quiet garden where the soul grows its deepest roots. If Harold's story touched your heart tonight, please take a moment to subscribe and share your thoughts below. Your words, just like his letters, might be the light someone else needs tomorrow.